In spite of the upheaval in Syria and ISIS military activity in Iraq, and in spite of all the tension around the negotiation of nuclear non-proliferation agreement with Iran, it seems that today, this Sunday morning in mid-September of 2015, that at this moment, according to CNN this morning, there is no nation that the United States is about to invade. Amen? And it seems to me that at a moment when there are not clouds of war gathering on the horizon is the perfect time to spend just a few minutes in reflection about the meaning of modern warfare. I'd like to go on record this morning as officially being opposed to the next war, wherever it will be. I trust that my saying that won't shock anyone. I am a pastor. This is a church. Religious people have been proponents of peace throughout the centuries when we have managed to keep our wits about us. And when congregations are falling prey to the hysteria of fear, oftentimes their pastors will go along with it and act like they're pro-war. But given a moment to think about it, religious people, Judaism, Islam, Zoroastrianism, Christianity, Buddhism, is officially opposed to warfare. The people who profit from warfare always try to silence religious voices by telling us that we have no business commenting on politics, that ours is the business of faith, although faith has always been in favor of life. Faith has always been protective of the value of human life, to seek peace, to seek justice, to defend the poor and the weak. The military-industrial complex makes money in times of peace and in times of war, but there really is no comparison to the amount of profit that they make in peace times to the money that they make in times of war. Ammunition and equipment that is stockpiled gathers dust and doesn't have to be replaced during peace times. But missiles that are fired, airplanes that are crashed, tanks that are used, they have to be replaced. And that's where the profit is, as well as all of the purveyors who make uniforms, provide food, and all the services related to supporting an active army. The capitalists get rich during wars so that they want the religious people to just stay out of their way, for churches to remain silent. But just to be clear, in answer to their request that the church stand idly by and be passive, the answer is no. Okay, it's hell no, but it's no. It's a clear no. Over the past 14 years, the church has been far too silent. When they weren't silent, they were oftentimes embarrassing. By the way, they always seemed to speak up for the wrong side. We began today with this quote from the late Senator Ted Kennedy, who in 2003 accused the Bush administration of lie after lie, saying that the case against Iraq was a myth that had been cooked up in Texas to give them an excuse to start a war that would transfer billions of dollars into the hands of Halliburton, Morton Thiokol, GE, and other wartime providers. To the best of my knowledge, I was the only pastor in Springfield, Missouri, who opposed the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, the only pastor of a church. There were several retired clergy and others, but to the best of my knowledge, in 2002, as we built up to the invasion of Afghanistan and then started the bombing in Iraq in 2003, I was the only pastor of a church and that spoke at our far too infrequent anti-war protests. The seriousness of the deception sold to the American people through the vehicle of fear only got worse in later years as we became unavoidably aware that it was not only an illegal war based on lies, it was also being conducted in the most immoral way possible through the unconscionable torture of prisoners of war. Now, we felt entirely justified in even going into nations who were ostensibly our allies to kill Osama bin Laden, because he was the mastermind behind a terrorist attack that killed more than 3,000 Americans. But we invaded Iraq and killed possibly more than 500,000 people to get Saddam Hussein, who, though he had nothing at all to do with the 9/11 terrorist attacks on the USA, Saddam Hussein still wasn't a nice guy. He had been running a brutal regime in which he had killed thousands of his own citizens, but he had not killed 1/10 as many as we killed. Though by comparison, the crimes of Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein would, if you just look at the body count, pale in comparison to the crimes committed by the United States of America, nothing has been seriously said about putting George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, or members of their administration on trial for treason against the American people, for lying us into an unnecessary war, or for war crimes clearly committed by torturing prisoners of war. Switzerland is not going to invade the United States and execute George Bush the way we invaded Pakistan and executed Osama bin Laden. Sweden is not going to invade the United States and arrest Dick Cheney and put him on trial and have him hanged at the end of the trial. Though there was speculation in 2011 when Bush suddenly canceled plans to speak at a conference in Switzerland that he did not go out of fear of being arrested for war crimes, there actually are no warrants in any nation for the arrest of either Dick Cheney or George Bush, because no nation would be willing to suffer the backlash that they would get from the United States government. But it is also true that neither Bush nor Cheney have ventured into Europe since they went out of office. Even appearances in Canada have provoked thousands of people to show up with signs denouncing both of them as war criminals. In some cases, the police have felt the need to don full riot gear to protect Bush and Cheney from angry mobs. There were certainly people in the United States who wanted members of the Bush administration to be charged and to make them stand trial, but President Obama made it clear that he would not be seeking prosecution for past crimes, though he announced as soon as he took office that the policy of torturing prisoners ended at that moment. In the past few months, however, the American Civil Liberties Union has been asking the Obama administration to grant pardons to Bush and Cheney and several key members of their administration. The precedent that they cite is that in 1974, the decision of newly sworn-in President Ford to pardon Richard Nixon, who had just resigned from the office of president. Nixon was never charged and he was never put on trial, but Ford pardoned him as a way of saying, probably guilty, but we're not going to make the United States suffer through the kind of trial that would have to tear the country apart if Nixon was charged. Ford's thinking was that we needed to be spared that trauma, but that we also needed to acknowledge that what Nixon did was not okay. That by offering a pardon, you're acknowledging that what he did was wrong, that the crimes were not insignificant just because they've been done by a president. Now, sadly, a few years later, in 1977, Nixon sat for a long series of interviews with David Frost in which he said, if the president did it, that means it's not illegal. But the rest of us knew that the president is not above the law, and the mere fact that Ford had pardoned Nixon was a statement that these crimes are crimes no matter who does it. President Lincoln pardoned Southern soldiers after the Civil War because the nation needed to heal and they didn't want to put Southerners on trial for war crimes or sedition against the state. There was a blanket pardon so that the country could heal. President Carter pardoned draft dodgers at the beginning of his presidency because the Vietnam War needed to be over and the country needed to be healed. They had disobeyed laws. They had either left the country or some had actually gone to prison for failing to register or appear before their draft board. But the pardon was to let the country heal. So what the ACLU is saying, and God knows I wish that it was the United Church of Christ or the Disciples of Christ or the Presbyterian Church, but the ACLU is saying that we shouldn't have to pretend. We shouldn't have to pretend to the American people or to Congress or the Senate that it's okay to start an illegal war, that it's okay to defy Geneva Conventions of war by torturing prisoners, that these are crimes. We shouldn't have to pretend like it didn't happen. We cannot pretend that these would not be war crimes if Osama bin Laden did it or Saddam Hussein did it, but not illegal if done by an American president. While there are certainly those in the ACLU who would like to see some of the Bush administration stand trial, the official request is that accepting that it would be bad for the country to put a former president and vice president on trial, it is also morally unacceptable to pretend that they are innocent. They are asking President Obama to pardon George Tenet for authorizing torture at the CIA's black overseas sites, Donald Rumsfeld for authorizing the use of torture at the Guantanamo Bay prison, David Addington and John Yoo and Jay Bybee for crafting the legal cover for torture, and George Bush and Dick Cheney for overseeing it. Their argument is that we absolutely must not say to the world or to ourselves that torture is okay as long as it's only the United States that's doing it. Nor can we say that the United States can invade a sovereign nation without just cause. To pardon the Bush administration will at least acknowledge that we are a nation of laws and not of kings. Frankly, this is not entirely satisfactory to me because as we sit here in this church this morning, there are 500,000 Americans who are in prison, not because they led to an illegal war or because they tortured prisoners or killed anybody at all, but because they were found guilty of possessing drugs. Thousands of them were just kids caught in possession of small amounts of marijuana, and yet they merit a long prison stay while killing 500,000 innocent civilians is not even being mentioned by anyone other than the ACLU and me. For the same reasons that Switzerland wouldn't really arrest a former American president who happened to be on their soil, I know that members of the Bush administration who are guilty of horrible crimes will never serve a prison sentence or stand trial, but they should at least be pardoned to show that we know better than to do to Iran what we did to Iraq. Now, I'm not anti-American, but I am anti-war. I'm not unpatriotic. I'm patriotic enough to want my country to be one of the good guys. You know, the kind of country that doesn't torture prisoners of war. I don't hate George Bush or Dick Cheney. I just don't think that they're any better than the 2 million Americans who did stand trial and are currently in prison for the crimes that they committed. And that's not politics, that's just sane religion.
You've been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at reverenddray@aol.com for more information.